Survival is not just about staying alive. It's about finding hope, healing, and strength. This is The Survivor's Voice. I'm your host, Angie Sedore. Before we begin, this episode may contain discussions of trauma, abuse, or other sensitive topics. Listener discretion is advised. We don't recommend listening to this show with young children present, and we encourage you to prioritize your well-being. Today on The Survivor's Voice.
At that first appointment, the doctor said it was going to be different than our last pregnancy. There's no way in hell that you were giving up on her. I'm not, and you're not going to either. It's really given us a new way to live, a new understanding for life.
Today, we are here with Billie Rae, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her story. Billie, tell me, where are you from here? Where are you at today? What's going on in your life right now?
Well, I grew up in Alaska. I was one of 4 girls. I was the youngest. My 3 sisters are my stepsisters.
Okay.
I moved from Alaska when I was 14 with my mom to Arizona.
That's quite the difference. Oh
it
my
was
gosh.
Drastic,
Wow.
Yes. And I lived there for a few years and moved up to Idaho. One of my sisters had lived here. I really fell in love with it. I always said this is as close to Alaska as I'll get because we have all 4 seasons.
Yes.
I can go visit the ocean or the mountains.
True.
And still drive to another state.
Yeah.
And so I really just fell in love with it here, and I've been here ever since.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. What do you do?
I'm a stay-at-home mom. I have 4 kids. I have 2 sets of twins.
So very
Our
busy.
boys are 9. Yes.
Did you say 2 sets of twins?
I did. Our boys are 9 and our girls are 5.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're all in school now, but I just need to be available for them. So
Yeah.
here I am.
Yep. You have the hardest job of all time.
Right.
So let's start from the beginning.
We'll start with when we dedicated our boys to the Lord when they were 4.
Okay.
And in the prayer and the message from our pastors, she had said, whatever you give to the Lord, you get back times 2. And so we didn't really think anything of it. But the next day I took a pregnancy test. I was pregnant. And so at our first ultrasound, we had twins at our second set of twins. And so it came very true that what we gave to the Lord, we got back times 2.
Yes, you did.
So at that first appointment, the doctor said it was going to be different than our last pregnancy because the type of twins the girls are, they were touching.
Okay.
And so they were in the same sack.
Oh.
Their cords were wrapped together. So we had to be monitored a lot closer.
Okay.
And at 25 weeks, I was due to be admitted in the hospital for 24-hour watch just to keep track on their heart rates.
Okay.
So at the end of June, I went in for 40 days and was on a bed for 24/7 with monitors just to kind of keep track of them. But other than that, it wasn't any high risk. There was no complications. Everything was good.
Yeah.
They were born 2 days earlier than we expected for a C-section.
Okay.
Just because their cords were so tightly wrapped and they couldn't differentiate the 2 heartbeats.
Oh.
And so they just took them out early to err on the side of caution.
Okay.
And everything was good. They were
Yeah.
born healthy.
Are they identical?
They are.
And are your boys?
Yes.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, I've always wanted twins, so I think it's really incredible that you have 2 sets of identical twins. It's
Yes,
really
it's
amazing.
fun. It really is a wild ride, but it's fun.
So they were healthy?
Yeah.
Huh.
Everything was good. Everything was so good because they were born in Spokane. They have a better maternity ward for the things I needed for labor and delivery.
Sure.
But they were so good there, and our insurance approved them to be moved to Kootenai because it was closer to home, and they were so healthy that transfer was okay and it was approved.
Awesome. So you mean you went from that hospital to another hospital?
Correct.
Okay.
And the girls were transferred to the NICU here in Coeur d'Alene, and it was great. They were close to home, and we were so happy because we didn't have to drive all the time to go out to Spokane to see them every day.
No kidding. Yeah.
Knowing they were still going to be there for another month, that's a lot of driving.
Oh, yeah.
So, we were ecstatic that they were going to be closer to home and we could have our family visit and our pastors come pray and just be with us and be our support. And not even 24 hours, it was probably 15 hours after they were at Kootenai, I was going in to visit them, and I got a phone call. I was dropping my boys off with my sister. The nurses called me and said I needed to get into the hospital ASAP because one of our girls were really, really sick. And it was basically a life or death situation.
Oh my
Get in
God.
here now. And so I did. And when I got there, they wouldn't let me in the room. They wouldn't let me see her. Well, she's not stable yet. I'm like,
oh my gosh.
She's 28 days old. What do you mean she's not stable?
And she was like perfect 24 hours ago.
Right. And so they diagnosed her with, she had GBS meningitis, late onset GBS meningitis, which is an infection that the moms carry that they can get from the moms, but typically moms are given antibiotics while they're still pregnant to cure that infection. But I tested negative for it twice because, mind you, I was in the hospital for 40 days.
Sure.
And they tested me frequently. So I tested negative twice. And right before this C-section, I also tested negative. So she didn't get it from me. So that led me to believe that she got it from the hospital somewhere, or in the ambulance, or somewhere. But this infection led her to have sepsis and meningitis at 20 days old.
Oh my God.
28 days old, sorry. And she had to have 3 emergency blood transfusions because all her red blood cells were eaten from the infection. And they didn't think she was going to make it. When they finally let me come see her, she was white, completely lifeless and white as a ghost.
How many days was it until they let you see her?
It was a couple hours.
Okay.
They just needed to stabilize her.
Okay.
Yes. So that was better than it could have been.
Yes.
But it was still the longest couple hours of my life.
Bet. Yeah.
But it was on ET, when ET's sick and he's in this hazmat room and he's super white and laying there. Like, that's all I can remember seeing. It's like what it reminded me of. Due to the infection, she got what's called hydrocephalus. It's water on the brain because it just closed off her ventricles in her brain and causes her CSF fluid to build up in her brain. And it also gave her cerebral palsy. So she's 28 days old with all these life-altering diagnoses and changes that she didn't, wasn't God's plan for her. But he's used it over these 5 years for the very best. But she finally got to come home. October 10th is when she came home.
How long was she in the hospital?
She was born August 3rd. Quite a while.
Yeah.
Her sister got to come home September 30th. She was at home for a little while without her twin sister. That was a hard one to deal with too, because now we have this newborn at home and this newborn in critical care. So we don't know how we can do that at the same time because sister can't go in and see her twin in the hospital. But yeah, she got to come home October 10th, and she came home with a feeding tube in her nose because she hadn't developed the ability to eat yet because her brain was still healing. But she did pretty good. Like, she did therapy. She was doing great. And was it February of 2020, right as COVID hit, she was due to get a VP shunt in her brain because that's going to help the fluid.
How old was she at that time?
Not even 1. So she's like 6-7 months old.
Okay.
So the first shunt was put in.
What a traumatic surgery for such a small
Yes.
baby.
So they had to put the tube into the center of her brain because that's where your ventricles are. And then it drains down into your abdomen so that additional fluid is absorbed back into the body as it should be, but just somewhere else. It just redirects it.
Gotcha.
So she got that put in. Her surgery was the day after 5 of the 15 people who had COVID in our country got transported to Sacred Heart. So I was a little traumatized, but I knew she had to have this life-saving surgery. And we just prayed about it and believed God was going to use it. That's the only thing we could do at this time, and just believe it was good. And she was able to come home within 24 hours. She stayed the night, recovered well, and we came home. She had a few stitches. She had a new little bump in her head for the device, and life was good. Summer was well. We went camping for the first time, and she just enjoys being outdoors anyways, always.
What is it like as a mother who just had a child and you've got to take her back to the hospital to have a significant surgery? What is that like? What goes on inside of you as a mom?
Well, at that time, I didn't believe that. Not that I didn't believe. I just didn't know any better that the infection had came from the hospital. The hospital was still telling me that the infection came from me, that maybe the tests were wrong. So I didn't know at that time to think anything otherwise than, okay, well, this is just what needs to be done.
Yeah.
Like, let's just do it and trust in God and know that she was going to be better for this. Because if not, her head's just going to get bigger and bigger because that fluid's building up and it causes further brain damage. And so we just did what we were told to do.
Yeah.
Had I known what I know now, I would have opted for her to go to Seattle, which is where all her care is now. But again, we didn't know any better. We trusted in the system.
Yeah.
But it was scary. We rallied in prayer, and we just had everybody checking in on us and just really coming together and being there with us and just being a community. And that's what gets us through any time.
Oh, yeah.
So
how did your husband handle all of that?
Very well.
Awesome.
I think that because we both lean on God so much, and we understand that he's already got us through the worst part, that it's not always going to be easy, but we know that we can get through it together if we're both leaning on the Lord. Yeah, it's not easy, but we trust God.
Yeah. So you were saying that you guys went camping?
Yeah, we went camping. Life was good. We enjoyed a first summer with the girls. One was strolling around in a little walker, and our daughter, who was sick, she just would hang out with us and sit in her little chair, and life was good.
Yeah.
Summer came to an end, and she started getting, like, her first birthday, we noticed she was a little, maybe not feeling well, and we were thinking, well, maybe she's just getting older and learning how to use her body differently, and so maybe this is just part of a stages. We've never had a special needs child, and
yeah.
So we just kind of rolled with it. And then she started getting really sick and vomiting a lot and crying a lot. And we just didn't understand. So we finally took her to the doctor in Spokane because we knew that was a children's hospital. So we just took her there. And automatically I asked her neurosurgeon to, it's like a spinal tap, but they call it a shunt tap. So they check it for infections. And he refused, because he said if she was infected, if that shunt was infected, we would have seen signs way earlier than now. And this is September. So about 6-7 months down the road after her initial surgery. And he refused. And they did they even tested her for lupus. They tested her for everything, autoimmune diseases of all sorts. And they couldn't find anything on why she was sick. But her blood labs were showing that she had an infection somewhere. They just couldn't find it. So finally, after about 3 weeks, the neurosurgeon said, okay, fine, we'll tap it. And he's like, oh gosh, she has an infection in her brain.
Oh my goodness.
And so I'm like, oh, all right. So what are we going to do? And he took the device out, all the shunt system, took it out, and he has what's called an external drain. So everything went through the machine and stuff and kept the infection out. He kept doing tests. Okay, things are looking better. Let's put it all back in. And then right before he put it back in, he tested her again and said, well, she's not showing infection anymore. So maybe, and her numbers are good and her pressure. So maybe she doesn't need the system anymore. So let's just take it out for a few days completely and see how she does. I'm like, okay, thanks God, you healed her. Like, amen, oh my gosh, because I don't know any different. And I just trusted God so much. And I still do.
Yeah.
But, we just didn't know. And after a few days, she ended up having so much pressure built up in her brain, and that infection is still eating away at her brain, that she had seizures after seizures after seizures, and they had to intubate her and re-drill again into her brain to relieve that pressure with an external drain. And all of it could have been, since birth it could have been prevented, but we've been over that hump. But this second trip could have been prevented had he listened to us the first time and tapped her shunt, because your body is going to refuse any foreign object, and that's where any infection is going to be. And I'm not a doctor, and I know this, but he was so proud of his work. He was so sure of it. So at this point, he did re-shunt her on the opposite side, but couldn't find the infection. And she was there for 45 days, and they couldn't find the infection at all. And it just kept eating and eating and eating away. And they just told us to prepare for end of life. They had nothing.
No.
Yeah, they had
gosh.
nothing. They had nothing else to tell us. Like, we've done everything we could. I'm sorry, but, make arrangements, make funeral services, like prepare for end of life, like talk to your family and all these things. Mind you, we're still in September 2020 and they won't let anybody in the hospital. And I finally put my foot down. I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me. I didn't know to put my foot down. I assumed I was doing the right thing by listening to the doctors, but it just wasn't adding up. And I'm like, there's no way in hell that you were giving up on her. I'm not. And you're not going to either.
Yeah.
What else is there to do? And I finally started making phone calls to Seattle and just researching on the internet, like, who else in the area knows what these guys know and can do better. And so I called and talked to nurses and got on triage lines. And Spokane kept telling me that, well, they're not going to do anything different than we're already doing. I said, well, that's funny, because I've talked to these doctors and they said they want in on her care plan. And so can we get on a conference call so we're all on the same page? At least you're getting a second opinion. They would never allow me in on the conference calls to prove to me that they have talked to Seattle.
Oh, no
So I was
way.
just like, you know what? We're going to Seattle. Like, you are transporting her now. And they're like, well, can't really fly with this kind of device in her brain. So I have actually became pretty good friends with the NICU nurses in Coeur d'Alene, because we had been there through her traumatic situations.
Yes.
And I had become friends with them. And so I asked her, I said, this is what they're trying to tell me. Is this true or not? She's like, oh, absolutely not. They fly with these things all the time. I said, okay. So I told them, like, that's not an option. You are sending my daughter to Seattle and we're done with you. And then, I mean, these were the doctors keep telling me this. The nurses are a different story. They see them every day and they live your life with you and they love their patients.
Yep.
And so a lot of the nurses were so like, I'm just doing what I'm told, you know, and I'm like, I get it. You know, I try not to be a jerk, but it's our daughter's life. And so on November 6th, we finally got approved to go to Seattle. The nurses were in there. Oh my gosh, I will always be so thankful for them because they snuck my husband and our three kids through the back emergency exits and into our room so that because we didn't know if it was going to be the last time they ever saw each other.
Goodness.
We got a picture of in her hospital bed hooked up to all these machines, ready to fly out with all of our kids and me and my husband, that the nurses took a picture of our last family photo. And we didn't know if that was going to be the end or not. So I was really grateful for that. But yeah, we got to Seattle. My husband and all the kids drove up and stayed with his sister. And we were in Seattle together for 3 weeks until she was stable enough to, you know, the boys and the family and my husband come back home and do life. But after 24 hours of being in Seattle, they found the infection and they literally washed her brain out. They, you know, drilled in one side and drilled the other and sucked all the infection out.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And what took 45 days for Spokane to give up on, Seattle found in 24 hours. Right then, I was just like, I will never not come to Seattle. This is the only place she gets services at. I mean, even if we have an ER appointment, we'll go to Kootenai and they all will know her well enough that they'll call Life Flight and send us straight to Seattle. They bypass Spokane, period.
Good.
That's just our choice and that's how it is. But, you know, that brainwash really radically not damaged, but just shook her brain. You know, all of her nerve endings in the middle of her brain, her central system was shook. And so she sat for 45 days till she was able to repair. Like she had to get, she has a feeding tube in her tummy because her brain had so much damage that she's forgot how to eat, how to talk, how to suck on a binky, how to do anything. And her brain was just radically fried. And we didn't know if she was going to be our little veggie baby forever. We just didn't know. And we just believed and prayed and kept praying. And God's so good. She was having, because her nerves were shot, you know, and fried. So she would be real tense and shake and just in pain and cry and all the time, constantly, to the point sometimes I would have to go sleep on the lobby couches at the hospital because I couldn't be in the room with her because I couldn't sleep. And I'd hate to leave her, but I know if I didn't care for myself, then I couldn't care for her like she needed me to. So I would leave and the nurses would care for her and they were so great. But I had flown home for a Christmas weekend with my other three and my husband to just put the Christmas tree up, have a little bit of normalcy for them. And I prayed so hard for the Lord to just take that from her because I didn't want to see her suffering anymore. And I hung scriptures up around her bed and I just prayed and prayed and prayed. And I prayed the scripture and I read it over to her every day about the story that where Jesus cleaned this man's son from the seizures, from the demon that just, because that's what she would do. She would be rigid in the mouth and she'd foam and she'd just it would just take over her body. And it just reminds me so much of that story. And I would just pray it over her every day. And I was gone for 4 days and I came back and she was no longer that way. And so it just, you know, God used it and uses it and uses it. And then we got privileged to come home on Christmas Eve, on Jesus's birthday. Like, that is now...
With her?
Yes. She was released from the hospital at 8 a.m. on Christmas Eve.
Wow.
And we were to be with our family that night and be with them Christmas Day. It was a Christmas miracle. And every year we celebrate not only the birth of Jesus, but the miracle that he gave us and saved her and brought us home and bring us together as a family. And he never fails us. And through this, we've become so much stronger and resilient, and our children have learned a sense of compassion that most adults will never understand. That was in 2020. She came home from a 90-day trip of life and death roller coaster that should have never happened. But that's okay because the devil wants to use for bad. God makes in for good, for our good, and for his glory. And he showed us that. And she was good. She was making progress. She's learning to stand that whole year. Like,
wow, that's awesome.
Yes, like learning to keep her head up and use her muscles and learn to stand. And she's just vigorous therapies for a long time. And she was making such good progress and learning how to use, it's a gait trainer. It's like a walker.
Yeah.
And it keeps her like taking steps, and she was doing so good. And she got sick with the flu, and because of the way her brain is so sensitive to pressure, the fluid built up in her brain rapidly. Because she was dehydrated, we rehydrated her, but it's not the same as you and I would hydrate. So the fluid, the sodium in like Pedialyte caused too much sodium in her brain, and it caused fluid to build up quicker, and the shunt couldn't keep up with that extra fluid. So she had a stroke. We went to Seattle.
How old?
She was 2.
Okay.
So this was April of 2020, a week before Easter. 2022, sorry. So we went to Kootenai, but her sodium levels were really high, and they didn't trust that because that can cause seizures and cause neurological damage. So we went to Seattle, 24 hours in NICU, system was flushed, everything, or not NICU, but ICU, PICU. System was flushed, things were great, and it was probably 4 in the morning, and all the lights got flipped on, and the nurses are yelling. She's flatlined. She's at 4 beats per minute. She had had a stroke because this part of her brain, the top part of her brain was good, but now the back part of her brain, where her brainstem is, was also filling up with fluid from that extra pressure. And so she had a brainstem stroke.
Wow.
Which meaning it's responsible for her entire internal organs of her whole body. They, immediately intubated her, had to resuscitate her, and I can just
Did you
stand.
have to witness that?
Yes. I was
That's
sitting,
traumatic.
I was sleeping on the bed, and all I can just do is pray and worship and praise and, sing and pray and cry and freak out. And they took her to emergency surgery because they saw that, she needed to have some pressure relieved from her brain. So she's in surgery again at 4 o'clock in the morning. And all I can do is I call my husband, I call my sister, I call my prayer warriors, and we just get on the phone. My husband, unfortunately, was the last person I called because I needed to gather my bearings about the situation before I wake him up, in a whole other state and tell him what's going on after I just told him 6 hours ago that she's good, we'll probably come home. So I call my husband, and he gathers, wakes everybody up, gets a travel trailer, load it full of everything, and just comes out here because we don't know how long we're going to be here. And he just knows that we're going to be together living in a trailer. I don't care what we're doing, but this is what's happening. And so that happens. And the doctor comes out, the neurosurgeon comes out, and she's crying. She's crying. And I'm like, oh gosh, my daughter's dead,
Oh my gosh.
That's all I could think. And we sit down at the table, and she holds my hand, and she says, well, she suffered a brainstem stroke. It is a right-sided brainstem stroke, which none of us knew until after her CT. So we did the surgery, we put the shunt in, we relieved the pressure, but she was still intubated and all this time. Typically, when you have a brainstem stroke, your body stops working because your brain needs your brain to work. And she's crying, and she says, we had to take imaging after to make sure the surgery was successful. And to do that, we had to take the breathing tube out because she wouldn't fit in the machine. She's like, all of us said a prayer because we didn't expect her to live after this imaging. And she started breathing on her own without the machines. And so they said everybody started crying because they just knew she was going to be okay. When the surgery is successful, she's breathing on her own. It wasn't the left side of her brain. Again, God was there, and he saved her from that. Yes, she's right side paralyzed now and learning to use it a little more than she had before, but she's with us. She's, she can say mama, dada now. She doesn't feed herself. She's still tube dependent. She's in a wheelchair. She's 5 now. She has not been in the hospital for 2 years. She hasn't had any scares for 2 years.
Thank God.
Thank God, yeah. And it's just, she's gone to school the last 2 years in pre-K developmental school. She's a full-time kindergartner this year. She goes the same time as all of her siblings. She doesn't take a break during the day.
That's fantastic.
She's a champ. She's our little hero. And who cares if we have a hard day? We've done hard things. We know that it's only a day. God's really seen us through some crazy things, and it's really given us a new way to live, a new understanding for life. And we just work through all of that together as a family. And it's hard, it's different, but we still do all the things that we would normally if she hadn't all these indifferences and complications. We just do it differently. It's been a wild ride, but like I said, these last 2 years, she's really shown us that she's here to stay. She's not going anywhere, and God's really used this in situations with other people on the outside where, they believe a little bit more. And my mother-in-law, who, doesn't pray or anything. Hey, I'll pray for you guys, or hey, I'm praying for Addie today. And those things God's just using to change everybody's lives around us, and we're seeing that.
You had mentioned a few things during your story about, we didn't know what we knew. And did you ever go back to the hospital? Was there ever any sort of investigation, lawsuit, anything like that?
We've hired 3 different lawyers. One from California who works in Washington, and they gathered their own team of pediatric doctors and replayed the entire scenario and couldn't find any fault in the hospital. He said that we could take it to trial, but typically people don't know any different than, the average Joe. So they usually side on the doctor's sides. We've had a lawyer in Pennsylvania tell us the same thing. And so we've just kind of, okay, that's not in the cards.
Okay.
It should be, but it's stressful and exhausting to fight that. And
It is.
it's
Relive
not going to,
it.
it's not going to change the outcome.
Yeah.
And so we just go with, she teaches us new things about ourselves every day.
I really like that you were such an advocate for your daughter, because I think a lot of people don't understand that us as civilians, as individuals, we're the only ones that can fight for our care.
Right.
It's us.
Right.
Right. And so, you had to learn that.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for everybody that's listening to know, like, we have to fight the fight for our loved ones.
Right. And we didn't know that for so long. We just trusted in them.
Yeah.
So we didn't know any different. But it really there was just a gut feeling that something just wasn't right. Like, there's no way this could be it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way.
Yeah.
That just wasn't making sense to us. And we weren't letting that, had we got to Seattle and they said the same thing, then maybe we would have thought about it a little differently. But something wasn't sitting right. And the fact that they were so hesitant to even listen.
Yeah.
Or wanting us to transfer.
And a second opinion, it's so important. There's nothing wrong with getting a second opinion.
No, especially with a child.
And I hate that there's an intimidation factor when it comes to physicians and us.
Yes.
That we feel like we can't speak up, or we can't get a second opinion. Yeah, they're smarter than us,
yes.
And so we just really need to break down that barrier.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I'm not one to be like, oh, Spokane this or Spokane that. Sure. But at the same time, maybe she exceeded their resources.
Right.
That's a good possibility.
Sure.
She is pretty complicated at this point, but it didn't have to get there if they would have listened to begin with. But we're up and over that. I don't want to blame gaming anything. Again, God's using it for his good and teaching other people. I mean, maybe even the medical staffs maybe learned something out of this. So we're just moving on to the next page. And she's just a lovely little lady. And she's so funny. And she's so smart. And she's just this non-verbal little girl stuck in a body that she can't move. But she understands everything completely. And you can tell that she's just like, she'll roll her eyes. She'll turn her head away. No, I don't want to hear that right now.
She's sassy, huh?
Oh my goodness. Yes, very much so.
Well, you're incredibly gracious.
Thank you. I've had to learn to be.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you feel like people need to know that would just help them on their journey if they're in it right now with a child, with a loved one, with a spouse, with anybody that's going through something very similar? What would you tell them?
There's going to be people who want to help you and who want to be in your corner and who want to be in your village that you may not necessarily know or want to be around, but let them, because they don't know how else to help you. Sometimes that's your best resource, is just support. Let them come cook a meal for your family. Let them take your kids to school.
Yeah.
You don't even have to ask, but if somebody's willing to help, just let them be that for you.
Yes.
Because you're mentally not in the state to know what you want or what you need, but other people might be able to step up and be that for you. It's what got us through. Aside from praying and aside from really relying on God, there was people who would drop groceries off at our house. I missed my husband's birthday and somebody brought birthday cards and gifts over because I couldn't be there for him. And my kids were, my boys were little. They were 5. They didn't know any different. They just knew our family was apart. And so it was just really important to have people there for us to do that. And like I said, some people we didn't even know.
Accept the help.
Yes, accept the help. And just, yes, our biggest was just being dependent on other people and allowing that to be okay.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things you said really resonated with me in some of the experiences I've had. So thank you for being so honest with us. And
yes, thank you for having me. It's important to, you said, just other people who are listening who might be here or, may be there in the future or may have been there and hold on to some bitterness or hurt or pain. And it's not that we don't hold on to that. We just choose to use it in a different direction. We have held on to it before, but really just leaning in on God and knowing that this isn't forever. This isn't going to be her overall outcome or ours even, and learn to work around it. Like I said, we still go to Silverwood, we still go camping, we still go do all the things. It just looks different for us and takes a little bit longer, and we just have a wheelchair, and that's fine. Yeah, we make it work.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your resilience. Thank you for telling your story, and wow, appreciate you.
Thank you.
Next week on The Survivor's Voice.
Having my previous, suicide attempts, the family drama, I wanted to get out. I knew what I had to do. I immediately went downstairs, got on a sat phone to call his dad. That right there was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. They've given all of theirs and nothing's given back.
Thank you for joining us on The Survivor's Voice. I'm Angie Sedore, reminding you that every survivor's story matters, including yours. If you or someone you know has a story to share, you can contact us at booking@thesurvivorsvoice.net. Your voice deserves to be heard. If you enjoy the survival stories we share, we would love it if you gave this channel a follow and a 5-star rating. No matter how dark the journey, the light of resilience shines brighter. Thank you for listening. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing this story of survival, please share this powerful testimony with them. A heartfelt thank you to our incredible listeners for your unwavering support and to the survivor community for your courage and resilience. You are the heart of this podcast.